I just want to welcome everyone. Good morning. What is today? Happy Wednesday, the day before Halloween. Um, I'm Diane Corman-Levy, Chief Disruptor at Women's Way, whose mission is to advance gender equity by building collective power to disrupt oppressive systems and strengthen alternative models centered in love, dignity, and liberation. And I just want to briefly say, how do we do this? How do we actually strengthen alternative economic models that are inclusive and equitable? Well, we do this by centering the wisdom, stories, and expertise of those most impacted by systems of oppression. We train stakeholders on how to design and lead with gender equity, and we invest in collective work aimed at the root causes, including strategies that reduce wealth extraction and those that help build individual and community wealth. At Women's Way, we believe that the real path to prosperity includes supporting people and communities with the ability to self-determine, not projects that exploit them. We believe that putting resources in the hands of decision makers in the community is a meaningful investment towards sustainable wealth and the fastest route to economic freedom. Concentrating wealth in the hands of a powerful few, as an arena would do, runs contrary to this goal. So we are conducting this meeting about the 76th place impact because we work with our partners to strengthen alternative economic models that build community wealth and directly contribute to communities' well-being. One of our main roles is to convene stakeholders like we are today to learn more about initiatives that threaten the well-being and health of our communities, such as 76th Place will do, as well as initiatives that build new economic models centered in inclusion, equity, and dignity. Now, this meeting is targeted for funders and investors in our region and what role they can play during the due diligence process. So I am honored, deeply honored, and delighted to introduce you to Debbie Way, member of the Save Chinatown Coalition. Debbie, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much. Thanks for having us. Could we go to the next slide? I wanted to introduce you a little bit to who the Save Chinatown Coalition is. At this point, we're about 100 plus organizations citywide. Next slide. These more and more folks are joining the coalition, more and more folks are joining in. We are now citywide. People have made connections to this fight in terms of what's happening in their own communities, in terms of even just processes that the city should not be engaged in. And most importantly, I think we've recognized that this is going to impact not just Chinatown, but another critical safe space for another impacted, marginalized community in the city, which is the neighborhood. And I think for those reasons alone, this is a citywide issue. Next slide, please. Little bit about Chinatown and our past. We have already had serious disruption and land taken first by the Vine Street Expressway that you see on the north, which plowed through our community in the early 70s. We had the convention center and the commuter rail tunnel, as well as Market Street East in the 80s and 90s, as well as the gallery to the south. The commuter rail tunnel took the entire Market Street East took from took 8th and 7th Street, which had Chinatown residents, and the commuter rail tunnel took 8th to 9th Street and leveled them into parking lots. The convention center displaced 200 of our families 200 of our people as well. The gallery displaced some businesses, no residents, but certainly some businesses. In the gray, you'll see the large things that we've had to fight off, which include in the northeast corner, the 93 proposal for a federal penitentiary, in the northwest corner, a baseball stadium in 2000, in the south side, arenas, both in 2008 and 2013. Next slide, please. We're focusing on some big picture issues in this presentation today. Mostly that we are a city in crisis. We are the poorest big city in the country. We are about to announce additional massive school closures. There's a affordable housing crisis. SEPTA is about to drive its subways off a cliff. And for the past 2 years and for the next 3 months, City Council has been solely focused on a private development for 3 multi-billionaires. This is unacceptable to us, and it has increasingly become acceptable to large swaths of the city. And so our movement is now no arena in the heart of the city because of all these issues. Next slide, please. This is a brief agenda. I'm gonna introduce our presenters. We'll run through these issues, and then we'll ask you to engage with us in a Q&A. Okay, next slide, please. And the presenters this morning come from the research committee of an offshoot arm of the coalition, No Arena and Chinatown Solidarity. We have Jeremy Wolin, who is a PhD candidate in architecture at Princeton University, Alex Jin, a PhD candidate in history at Princeton University, and Jennifer Yeep, the senior program manager for the Trust for Public Land. Next slide, please. And Jennifer, take it away.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer. I'm going to present some data from the city's own impact studies about how the arena development will affect local businesses and the cultural identity of Chinatown. So the community impact analysis primarily examined the effects of the arena in the adjacent area, focusing mostly on the impacts of the arena in Chinatown and no adjacent neighborhoods. The findings indicate that half of local businesses are likely to experience net negative impacts, and over 70% of these businesses have been operating for at least 5 years, with over half having been open for at least 10 years. Over the 5-year construction period and 30 years of operation, 76 Place could significantly disrupt Philadelphia's revenue sources and cost the city over 500 businesses, nearly 16,000 jobs, and a cumulative loss of nearly $1 billion in lost tax revenue for the city. Next slide, please. Even minor changes in pedestrian pathways, crosswalks, road closures, and traffic patterns can significantly affect small businesses, which often operate on thin margins. Ime Restaurant in Chinatown has been in operation for over a decade, and the owner, Dan Sao, predicts that the traffic congestion from construction and the eventual arena traffic will disrupt their business. Over 40% of the restaurant's sales are from delivery, and resulting delays will negatively affect their customer base. Next slide, and I'll pass it back to Debbie.
Yeah, I would just add what Dan had said to me was that the economic model for the restaurants, particularly in Chinatown, shifted during COVID. And that's when everyone shifted to Uber Eats and DoorDash and places like that. One of the things that those businesses do is have an AI algorithm. And if traffic is backed up in an area, your restaurant doesn't even appear as an option for people to order food from. So he knows this business very well. And so does everyone else in Chinatown, and they know this is why we know that this is existential for us. Okay, next slide. So we had requested impact studies from the city, and the only ones that actually addressed Chinatown, they ignored all our other requests, especially for environmental and economic impact findings. They did not study the economic impact on Chinatown and its over 250 small businesses. But the community impact study did study Chinatown, and based on, and it did have a scientific basis. It used quantitative data, and some qualitative data from interviews and testimonials, and found that Chinatown will lose its core identity as a result of this. These impact studies have been released to council. Council has not said a single word. They did say they were waiting for the impact studies to make a decision, but there has not been a single hearing. There has not been a single question raised. There has not been a single opportunity to question the writers of these impact studies. So one wonders if they've read them, because certainly if they had read them and seen these points, you would expect a little bit more questioning. Next slide, please. There's a human rights organization called The Shift, which is run by two people, Leilani Farha, who is the former UN rapporteur for the human right to housing at the United Nations, and Sam Freeman, who is the former lead legal researcher at the United Nations. They actually did an investigation of this, and they found that it was a violation of international human rights law, wrote a letter to the developers, and cited, among other things, what's on the slide. And of course, that letter was ignored. Next slide, please.
So now I'll take us through the harm that the city's impact report say that the arena will bring to Philly's infrastructure and the danger that poses for Philadelphian safety, health, and public transit access. So I'll start with how the city's own studies tell us that gridlock is guaranteed. It's important to keep in mind this is because arenas are really unlike any other attraction in that they let out 18,000 people all at once. And this puts really big strain on infrastructure that you don't get from people coming and going from a convention center or several hundred leaving a theater. And Philly's impact studies say that with 18,000 people leaving all at once, Philadelphia can only avoid gridlock if car usage at 76th Place is below 41%. Now, the Sixers have said that they think they can get 40% as an average, but since this is an average, we can count on the fact that 41% or more of their attendees are going to drive much of the time. If you look at the left of this graph, you'll see that even Brooklyn's Barclays Center, which is a real kind of gold standard among arenas for transit usage, routinely gets driver numbers well over the benchmark that would gridlock Center City. It's also important to note that while the Sixers used New York data to claim that they could get 40% predictions, New York transit usage relies on a city where only 46% of people own cars compared to 71% of Philadelphians. So more realistic driver estimates would be Philly's own. The Wells Fargo Center is already one of only a handful of arenas in the country with a dedicated transit stop connected to a rail network as large as SEPTA's. But if you compare it to kind of other arenas in that same situation, like Oakland's and Seattle's, Sixers fans are still driving at much greater rates. Next slide. And this really hits hospitals hardest. This is important because while the gridlock that arenas create is annoying at best, it's really deadly at worst. The only level 1 trauma center south of Girard and east of the Schuylkill, Jefferson ZR, is just 2 blocks away from the intersections marked here in red that impact studies say are most likely to become impassable. And these are just the ones closest to Jefferson. This map was zoomed in to show the proximity, but most of the intersections on Vine Street from 6th to Broad are also impacted. And as Philadelphia's former health commissioner, Physicians for Social Responsibility's Pennsylvania chapter, and now the former chair of Jefferson Neurology and numerous other medical workers have maintained, this greatly decreases Philadelphians' chance of surviving things like heart attacks, strokes, childbirth, or organ transplants. Next slide. And so if Center cities' narrow streets make arena car usage catastrophic. The potential for pedestrian injury is actually equally bad. So the design impact report noted that surge space along the arena's 3 entrances is dangerously inadequate. In this setting, minor disturbances can cause dangerous crush or stampede scenarios. While other cities' arenas front on entire plazas or in the very least sidewalks much larger than Philly's Colonial Street grid allows, the small size of the Market East site is really barely big enough for an arena, which means it doesn't have any of that external space that makes crowd control more possible. Next slide. And finally, we get to transit access. So 76th Place, as we know, is right on top of Jefferson Station, which makes all of this even more complicated. 76th Place's own designers have said that they'll have to make structural adaptations to the station in order to support the arena overhead. And we know that 76 DevCo has been meeting with SEPTA officials for over 2 years now. And so it's suspicious that they and City Council haven't said anything about how construction will impact Jefferson or the larger rail network that can only access Center City via that station. And since regional rail is electrified, it will likely need to be turned off for construction to happen. 76 DevCo has said nothing of how long service will be reduced or shut down at Jefferson. And they've also said nothing of who pays for this. And this is a tactic that we've seen before. DC's Capital One Arena also claimed to take no public money for construction, but did make DC taxpayers pay the $60 million to adapt the Gallery Place Chinatown metro station that was built on top of. And that's over $100 million in today's dollars. And finally, it's important to keep in mind, SEPTA has already been cited by the Federal Transit Administration for deficiencies in things like safety and security. It doesn't seem wise to incapacitate, the second biggest hub of a system that cannot pay for these basic necessities just for 6 years of arena construction. Next slide. And finally, we get to just how concerning the Sixers and City Council's sheer lack of a plan is. The traffic impact studies say the Sixers absolutely need to provide a transit pass with every ticket to a game or event at this arena in order to have any hope of getting close to the only 40% car usage. But the Sixers have only promised to give transit passes to their own games, and even then, still only to season ticket holders. And even if they did give them to everyone, like, is done in Seattle, circled here on the graph, a city with similar car ownership numbers to Philly, Seattle's numbers show that even this wouldn't actually be enough to avoid gridlock, given that Philly has much narrower streets. And so finally, you'll be hearing a lot about how pitiful this community benefit agreement is, but in regards to transit, it doesn't come anywhere close to what's needed to keep Philly streets safe and accessible. So to end, we're seeing a traffic problem unlike any arena has seen before and with quite extreme consequences. And what I find most shocking is that Mayor Parker and Councilman Squilla believe that without any precedent, all this can really kind of be magically figured out after we let them pass kind of the arena enabling legislation. And so with that, I'll pass to my colleague, Alex Jin, to discuss impacts of tax revenue.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. And I think this is going to be a theme for what I'm talking about as well, where we're going to magically figure out all the economics later on. So next slide. We're going to talk a little bit about their numbers. And the issue when talking about their numbers is that there's so many different numbers, none of which are cited or audited, which I'll talk about later. But let's talk about tax revenue, for instance. On the 76ers website, they state that the arena would generate $1.5 billion in new tax revenue. But during her public meeting revealing details on the city's agreement with the Sixers, Mayor Parker said the number was actually $700 million. The economic impact study, however, says it's only $390 million, whereas the legislation says the number is $249 million. So I think regardless of your stance on the arena, the fact that there is a $1.25 billion discrepancy here between what the 76ers are promising and what's in the actual legislation should raise alarm bells. Next slide, please. We see similar inconsistencies in projected job creation. The 76ers, once again, on their website claim that they will generate 12,200 of what they call full-time equivalent jobs. 9,100 of which will be direct, and another 3,100 of which will be indirect and induced. The mayor, however, claimed that the arena would only create over 1,000 jobs, and this over 1,000 number is corroborated by the economic impact study, which states that the arena would create 1,800 full-time equivalent jobs. of which only 710 is projected to be going to people from the city. Again, we see this massive discrepancy of over 10,000 jobs being unaccounted for between what the 76ers are publicly saying and what's in the actual economic impact study. And we believe that City Council owes us an answer to what we can actually expect. I would also add another big caveat to these figures is that you've noticed that I'm not talking about jobs, I'm talking about full-time equivalent jobs. And what they're doing is they're cobbling together all the projected part-time low-paying jobs that when put together can amount to 40 hours of work a week. But the thing is, the vast majority of these jobs will not have the benefits and worker protections afforded by full-time work, since workers will only be hired part-time during certain parts of the year, such as concession workers during the 76ers season. Next slide, please. And if you're wondering why these numbers are varied so much, it's because, again, none of the numbers or statistics were audited by anybody. And the consultants working at the 76ers, CSL, and the city use different assumptions to arrive at their conclusions. And we see this even in the economic impact study itself, which states, quote, none of the information they used was audited, and that they provide no guarantee of their economic projections coming to fruition. Next slide. So now that we've covered this vast range in the alleged economic benefits of the arena, now let's talk about what the city is giving up, and perhaps the most important of which is the pilot. So what is a pilot? A pilot stands for payment in lieu of taxes. And from what we know so far, the city has negotiated a pilot plan with the 76ers that will generate $54.7 million in projected revenue over the 30 years. Under this plan, the 76ers will not pay any property taxes for those 30 years. And you might suspect that this would be a huge tax break for the 76ers, and you would be correct. So using estimates from the economic impact study itself, the Sixers should be paying at base value $14 million per year in property taxes. The pilot, meanwhile, only averages to about $1.8 million in projected value per year. With abatements and some other technicalities I won't get into, over the next 30 years, the city will essentially be giving the 76ers a $400 million tax subsidy, which you can see on this graph. And often you'll hear that the city will say, oh, pilots are necessary for us to lure sports teams and maintain the economic impact that they generate. But we see in other places, such as in San Francisco, where the Golden State Warriors just relocated to downtown San Francisco, and they actively chose to pay their property taxes. And their new arena cost them about $20 million a year because they wanted to invest in their community. Yeah, next slide, please. And in addition to this currently negotiated pilot being a huge tax break for the 76ers, the current deal also does not make the developers accountable for any of the costs that are going to be incurred from construction and necessary changes to infrastructure, which Jeremy's already talked a little bit about with the necessary upgrades to Jefferson Station. But this also means that if a road needs to be closed for construction and police needs to be on site for traffic diversion, for instance, or if we need to change stoplight technology to protect ambulances, all of that will be footed by taxpayers and not the 76ers. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jen, who will be talking about the community benefits agreement.
Thanks, Alex. Next slide, please. So what is a community benefits agreement? A community benefits agreement, or also known as CBA throughout this presentation, is a legally enforceable contract between a coalition of community-based organizations and the developer of a proposed project. It should involve community organizations, local government, private developers, and residents working together. And the purpose of a community benefits agreement is to ensure that the community impacted by a new development will benefit directly from the project's development. Next slide, please. However, in the case of the 76th place CBA, community organizations were excluded from negotiations. The CBA was negotiated between the city and 76 DevCo. In fact, Chinatown received the smallest amount in the community benefits agreement. They're slated to receive $2.1 million, with the majority of the funding earmarked for business disruption plan and $500,000 for a comprehensive master plan focused on traffic and parking, which represents about 4% of the CBA. Next slide, please. Thanks. If we take a closer look at the community benefits agreement, over 25% of the CBA will directly benefit the Sixers through initiatives outlined to train people to work at the arena, Sixers tickets, which Jeremy mentioned, and creating a basketball league. In fact, the benefits for the Sixers stand to receive are 7 times more than what the impacted neighborhoods will receive. Additionally, the CBA will direct money towards a number of Mayor Parker's own initiatives, including $7 million for extended schooling. It's important to note that the CBA payments for most categories abide by an annual payment schedule. So in the case of extended schooling, there's only $100,000 for the first 6 years, followed by $800,000 in the following 8 years, which is equivalent to $2 per student per year. This doesn't address critical needs such as air conditioning, asbestos removal, and school nurses. Other citywide initiatives funded by the CBA, such as a new neighborhood security substation and a Market East master plan, further siphon resources away from communities in need. Next slide, please. In total, over 96% of the CBA is allocated to benefit the Sixers and Mayor Parker's citywide initiatives rather than the neighborhoods most impacted. The developers should be accountable for costs that should not be counted as community benefits, which I mentioned include funding a police substation, CCTV, street lighting, and incentivizing SEPTA and PACTO use without any formal plans to improve those systems. The 76 CBA falls short of its intended purpose to benefit the communities most affected because community organizations have not had a seat at the table. They've been shut out of the decision-making process for a proper CBA. And with that, I'll turn it to Debbie.
Yeah, so we have a potential deadline. Yes, on October 24th, they did introduce the legislation. We got a precursor of how they are going to be handling this going forward, with a pretty, at least in my experience with council, unprecedented crackdown on any protest within chambers. They are fast tracking this to the point that they are hoping to ram this through before the city actually can organize itself to raise the questions that need to be raised. They are not sending this to smaller committees, which is typical of these types of legislation. It will be a committee of the whole on November 12th, meaning the entire body of council, so that they can bypass any of the like small committees meet, bring that to the large committee. They're bypassing that and presenting to the entire committee as a whole for the hearings. We suspect that the timing of this was carefully planned so that the election will suck the wind out of any news that is coming out during this time period when they're engaged in all of this. We also suspect that given the huge unpopularity of this project, they may be looking at taking the vote December 12th, which is the last session before they go on winter break, and that way they can take the vote and then leave without bearing the consequences. We believe that, like, it doesn't really actually matter if you support the arena or not. We're looking at an incredible lack of due diligence and governmental malpractice in terms of the way they are treating what is potentially one of the largest development projects in the city in recent history, and will likely determine the future of what this area of the city looks like over the next 50 years. So it's not good news in terms of the timeline, but we do think there is time for people to put pressure on legislators to do their due diligence to slow the process down. There really is no reason to rush this other than the developers wanting it rushed. It should be fundamental that this due diligence is done. And so with that, I think next slide. We do think that there is follow-up that you all could do. Mostly thank you for coming today, those of you that came, but really try to work hard to get others informed, because this is happening so quickly that no one's had the time to really look deeply into this. Write an individual, or better yet, a collective letter to council, sharing concerns, and certainly feel free to join us, join the Save Chinatown Coalition. Next slide. And now we'll open it up for questions and answers, and you can just come off mic if you have questions.
Debbie, there is just a comment in the chat and a question. There's a comment from Jane Combring Graham. It said, at an Old City Neighbors meeting last night, Mark Sequila admitted that no traffic impact study had been performed extending to Old City, 6th Street front to Walnut, Ben Franklin Bridge. This dismayed attendees who are already facing disruptions from the 95 cap construction. So that was a comment. And then Kelly Sheard wrote, what does due diligence look like for council? How should they engage with these studies or evaluate impact?
I think at the very least, well, what would have been great is if they had engaged in looking at the request for proposals during the whole process when they were defining what the impact studies would cover, because they clearly are insufficient in what they covered. In fact, they didn't do a new traffic study. They used the developer's own traffic study with the developer's own assumptions, which conveniently worked out to give them the numbers that they needed to pretend that it would be okay at 40%. I think that due diligence at this point would be to slow this process down, to say, take the legislation off the table until we actually have some hearings to look at the impact studies, unless we have some opportunity to ask questions. Certainly what Mark Squilla is saying now is, yeah, the traffic has problems, and his solution is, once the arena's built, he's going to have a committee of people that will look at the traffic, and if the traffic's a problem, this committee will try to come up with solutions. But I mean, the thing will already be built and operating. So, and the damage, at least for the construction period, will have been done. So it's a wholly inadequate response. There really should be a traffic management plan developed before legislation can be passed. I suspect they know that they can't manage the traffic, and therefore they're not requiring it. But these are things that council could be requiring in order to take a vote. Unfortunately, I think council themselves have not taken a deep look at all the implications, and there is that nasty thing of councilmanic prerogative that operates in the city. So whoever has misgivings may be afraid to put forward those misgivings because it's Mark Squilla's district.
Awesome. And I see lots of things happening in the chat about approaching, should we reach out to city council person even if they have stated no opinion? And yes, we should be reaching out to.
Even if they stated opinion, except if they agree, you can thank them. If they agree with us, you can thank them.
Yes, and Claire listed 3 city council folks who have come out in support of their coalition against Arena, which are listed here. And then Kelly Shear said, what is the concrete ask we have of council?
The first ask is, vote no, obviously. The second is to slow the process down to allow the citizens of Philadelphia to fully understand and fully ask their questions. I think the third is to ask city council members for a response to the impact studies. Like, what is your analysis? I think it's fair if they've actually looked at the studies, they should have an analysis. If that analysis is lacking, then there should be pushback. The main thing is this whole thing needs to be slowed down so that
Okay.
Folks can really understand. I think they should require a traffic management plan before any of this legislation can go forward, because in particular, the concerns of medical workers around the arena should be taken into account.
I just wanted to add to that, if you don't mind. We've been talking a lot about the traffic impact study and what that ask might be for city council. But that's huge, and we should do that. I also wanted to mention the tax piece and some of the questions around why are the Sixers not paying property taxes? Why are they getting this massive tax break that would go to public services or our schools? Why are they allowed to do that when there are other arenas that do pay their property taxes, and as well as studies around what the real economic impact will be. So we've mentioned a few times in this presentation that they're calling the economic impact study only looked at the benefits again. So it didn't look at what the economic impact would be elsewhere. So, the closing of the fashion district will be a loss of jobs. There will be a loss of jobs with these local small businesses, particularly the ones in Chinatown. And so there's sort of that ask as well, like what do a true economic impact study that looks at this.
Yeah.
So that's another ask.
Yeah, thank you for emphasizing the economic impact, because I even like a loss of this tax revenue. It's like that could be then fed back into supporting all kinds of infrastructure organizations. We're always hearing Philadelphia never has enough money to do the work that they need. And yet these billionaires are getting not paying taxes, but isn't that how capitalism works in America? It's just another, yes, this is how it works, folks. And this is why we're so passionate about this, because it just drives more inequity, in our region, and it's happening across our country. And also, I think the cultural impact too is really important. I mean, why are they targeting an area of Chinatown, right? I mean, what does that do to the cultural vitality of our city as well? And we're supposed to be a city of diversity and neighborhoods and celebrating the cultural richness of our city. And this is just a complete disregard to that. Any other questions from anyone?
I do see that Letty said to target at large, and certainly do that. Our issue right now is that we would need 9 council members to vote against this to overturn the mayor and to overturn Squilla. We don't have that count. We don't think we can get that count. What we do think we can get is a delay.
Okay.
I think we can get an agreement. They're lobbying hard. They're really pressuring. We have inside information that they will probably need state and federal money. At the state level, the district that this would cover includes Nikhil Saval, who has told us they're actually courting Republican votes to get the state money that they want. They have ignored him because they know he is opposed to it. So they're just working around him, even though it's his one of his areas. It's just it's incredible what a multi-billionaires are able to do, but it also makes it imperative that a line be drawn in the sand here, because this pretty much will put the nail in the coffin for things going forward. If they're able to get through this with the amount of opposition they faced, they'll be able to plow through the city for anything.
Very scary. So just so you know, we are recording this, folks, and we will be sending it out to everyone that's come here. We're going to be sharing this recording to as many people. But you heard the call to action, reach out to your city council, at people at large, share this data. And I guess I have a question to the team here. Is there anything that's like a briefer version that people can share, or just keep points, even through social media? I mean, I hate social media, but that's how people read stuff. Is there other ways we can present this data?
Claire or Rosie May, you want to take those?
Yes, thank you for asking, Diane. Our research, one of our passions is to create one-pagers that can be easily disseminated to the public. So we can definitely share one of those with you in email.
Great. Great.
Also,
Because-
the Save Chinatown Coalition, as well as No Arena Chinatown Solidarity, have very active Instagram pages.
Okay.
So it'd be really good if you do that to go on to follow them, and then that way you
Okay.
can repost the things that they're posting.
Yeah, we have
Great.
been through a few of those Instagram accounts, been posing some of these due diligence questions and asks as well as some of the data. So we have that social piece, and then we also have the one pagers.
Yeah.
That
And what they are doing is saying, call this council person this week and ask this question. And so
Great.
are driving people on a bird dogging campaign.
Great. So I think Claire just put some of the Instagram in the chat, but we'll share this too, Debbie, with everyone, like ways, you can share this really important information in bite sizes, because people don't read a lot today, unfortunately. And also I just want to point out Monique Curry Mims from Generosity said I just contact her. Where are you, Monique? Or you can just speak if you want, if you're still here, about they're going to do a series on this. We are currently working on an in-depth series on 76th Place. We'd love to connect with you.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, and I think, Monique, you put your email address in here somewhere. Yes, Monique@generosity.org.
Great. So Rosie May and Claire, I am unfortunately going to be out of the country for the next 2.5 months, but
Wow.
Rosie May and Claire and others in the coalition are going to be holding it down pretty darn well.
Great. All right. Any other last comments, questions, call to action? I think it's tell council to share their opinions on the impact studies, tell council to delay the process. We have to speak up. And Women's Way will do their part to share this information as much as possible to our stakeholders. I'm going to be sharing it to a lot of other major funders who are not here today. And last question, should we urge city council members to delay the December 12th vote?
You should urge them to delay everything. They are doing something, even this coming week, they are passing legislation that will allow this to go forward. So there's so much legislation involved that they'll be doing that throughout this period. So it isn't just delay December 12th, it's delay everything.
Everything.
The fact that they moved immediately to committee of the whole for hearings is ridiculous. So they're just really trying to ram this down everybody's throats. I forgot one thing. If you go on the NACAS website and at the top of their bio is a link tree, and if you hit that, you can sign up to receive newsletters. NACAS sends out newsletters weekly, and those are probably the best way to stay up to date with what's going on.
Great. And Rosie, I see your hands up.
Yeah, the NACAS newsletters are amazing. I'm just gonna like that. But I also wanted to add that another opportunity is to join the coalition, and I'll pass that to Debbie to just share a little bit more information on what that might mean.
Yeah,
Great.
just let us know if you're interested in becoming a coalition member, and we can add folks to the list. We don't really have requirements of coalition members, but what we do is if there's an action we'll send it to the coalition, they'll send it to their members so that we can like really broaden the number of people that can show up at things. The problem we have now with city council hearings is that they happen during the day, and it's really hard to, people have to work, and
Yeah.
you know, turning out large numbers during the day has meant for some of us like taking personal days, taking vacation time, taking whatever we need to take to be able to get ourselves to these places. So I think the more we can get the spread out in terms of when we need people to show up, the better, because there's lots of people working from home now that have flexible schedules. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. If this is important, they can show up. So, so there's lots of stuff. We'll put all this together from the chat in terms of the Instagram handles, the links to websites, the call to action. And we'll distribute this to everyone here, but also we'll, like I said, Debbie, will distribute to our networks. And we'll hopefully get more people to join this effort to slow the process down. Anything else anyone wants to add, say?
Sorry to interrupt.
Claire,
Wanted
go
to
ahead,
drop
Claire.
the website that we were all talking about in the chat. So it's the noarenaphl.org that we recently rebranded. So it looks wonderful. If you would like to check out some of the wonderful resources that we've all been talking about, there's a City Council Watch, resources to talk to city council members, a number of other initiatives that have come out of the movement. So it's all in one place for everyone.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you, Claire.
I think
And thank you. Oh, go ahead, Debbie.
our one pagers are on the website. Yes, no.
Are they?
Some of them. We have
Some
yet
of
to put
them.
the most recent ones since there's been so much movement with legislation and everything.
Okay.
But there have been some of the more original one pagers were on that website.
Great. Well, we'll definitely encourage people to go to that website. Sounds like it's really it'll be really helpful information to share with others. So thank you again. First of all, thank you for the work you do. I know it's really hard. And we're, like I said, we're going to do everything to elevate and amplify this work and the potential impact that it's going to have. And so we are in allyship with all of you. And if there's anything else that we can do, let us know. But again, thank you. This was an incredible, thorough presentation. Every time I listen to all you, I learn more about what impact this could make on the lives of people in Philadelphia, in our city. So thank you all. And like I said, we'll be sending a recording out and everything else. Speak up, get this information out, contact your city council folks. Let's take action now. You can't wait till like next week. I know there's an election, but let's take action now because they are moving fast. So thank you all and take care.
Thank you. This was so lovely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.